Hello everybody, this is Dragyn here in our Dragon's Den. Pull up a seat and select a drink of your choice as we have another sort of nostalgic, interesting topic today. I'm very excited as I spent the last week compiling a list of my favorite books and authors that I've read, things that have just really stood out to me as a kid who was an avid reader. I still am somewhat of an avid reader, but it's slowed down quite a bit due to life and circumstances, working a lot and all that jazz, but I definitely want to get back into some reading here soon, so that maybe a follow-up of this list will be kind of a cool thing to do in like a year. So let's get started. We're looking at my books and influences today, so I will start roughly in kind of a chronological order. Then it's going to turn more into like genre based. So we'll do that. I know it's going to be a little all over the place, not as organized as my other episodes like the movies and TV shows ones, but this one will kind of follow a relative structure, and it might be interesting to you guys to hear my thoughts on different books and authors and all that jazz. So I'm going to get started with some of my favorite authors when I was younger. I know this is problematic to say now because there's been some revelations of Dr. Seuss's books being racist and imaging and all that kind of stuff, so I recognize that, and I'm sorry that he is on my list, but my childhood wouldn't have been creative and silly if it wasn't for the books. So I have to kind of bring that up a little bit. Dr. Seuss was part of my childhood reading list. Would I go back and read it and honor him now? No, I wouldn't, based on like that stuff that's been coming out. But I did like Cat in the Hat, The Lorax, Green Eggs and Ham. I read those like 3 books quite religiously and often. So I have to kind of give a little bow to that part of my childhood. So there's that. I will move on to a much more prolific Canadian author now that is super important to me. It is the Robert Munsch books. Robert Munsch himself. I remember loving his books as a little one, and I can't remember what grade it was. I was pretty young though, where he actually came to my school library, and we got to meet him and ask him whatever questions we wanted. So I got to ask him about the Paper Bag Princess. I don't remember what exactly it was. I think it was a silly question like, why did she have to have a paper bag? And he explained that like she just didn't feel like herself, and so she wanted to hide that. Yet the whole premise of the story is for her to realize, no, you are okay to be yourself and come out of hiding. So that was kind of a unique little experience that way. There we go. So Robert Munsch, part of my huge childhood. Paper Bag Princess, Love You Forever, cookies, all those things. So I absolutely loved his books, and it was such an honor that I got to meet him himself. A very cool story from my childhood there. What also is really cool about Robert Munsch is that I instilled my like for his books into my cousin when he was just really younger. He's like 3-4 years younger than I am. So he actually got to enjoy Robert Munsch too, because I read it to him when he was just like 1 or 2 years old. And I found out that he also read a couple of the books too. Oh gosh, like many years later, my little brother, because my little brother is 15 years younger than I am, I also got to read Robert Munsch books to him. So that's kind of been my like kind of legacy, I suppose, is just passing down Robert Munsch books to the younger members of my family. And if I ever have kids one day, I want to continue that for sure. It might not age well or be kind of a cool thing when I'm a parent, but and instilling a love of reading is super important, and starting with Robert Munsch is a great way to do it, I think. Definitely a good replacement for any problematic authors that have now been revealed or called out. So Robert Munsch is the way to go, guys. Definitely. Now we're moving into a specific book, and I have a very, very vague memory of my mom reading this book to me when I was younger. I don't remember anything of the actual book itself, but I have read it recently, like reread it. And yeah, of course I love it. It is Where the Wild Things Are. A movie came out quite a few years back, but I still just really, really love it. You're going to notice a theme with most of my books here is that the kid or the main person or even the main characters of a story, if they don't fit in very well, they stand out, yet they find a way to make it work between each other to be friends. That's my kind of jam. So the little boy going to see all these monsters and trying to figure out, like, well, you guys shouldn't hate each other. You shouldn't be annoyed at each other. You shouldn't be miserable. We should all be friends and have fun. Enjoy life. So it's a really precious little story that way, and I really do cherish it. I remember, I think it's 2 of my flights. So one flight back to North America when I was in the UK, I watched the movie again. And then I think back home, my one trip here, basically, in 2020, both ways, so to Edmonton from the UK, and then Edmonton to the UK, I got to watch that movie, and I love it. It's definitely a little nostalgia pleasure there for me watching that movie again. So, Where the Wild Things Are by Maurice Sendak. Go check it out. It is an older book now, of course, but it's a really sweet message and a very cute little story, for sure. The next 2 on my list here are more of a longer running series, and I've actually found out recently that the Junie B. Jones series went further than I expected. So yes, I was a Junie B. Jones kid, never a Judy Blume kid, oddly enough. It was just Junie B. Jones, and I loved the books. I read all of her stories and adventures through kindergarten. I did start it at Junie B. Jones as a first grader. I did start that, but I think by that time I had moved on into grade 2, grade 3. So I felt like I was kind of outgrowing it and stopped reading it. And yeah, I love that book. A silly, quirky little character, definitely stands out. Didn't quite fit in either, again, that kind of consistent theme from what I like to read fits in well with Junie B. Jones too. A quirky, fun little character, doesn't quite fit in, finds her group of friends. There's the drama, the silliness. It's a lot of fun, and I definitely enjoyed that series for sure growing up. And I also think I remember bothering my mom and dad, like, I need the new book, I need the next book, I need the next book, and them having to actually get me the next book every time. So there's that little precious childhood memory, that kind of avid reader, coming out to light here in this episode for you. Also, coffee is now a bigger part of my reading life here, so let's take a sip. Everyone, hydrate yourself, or caffeinate yourself in my case. Much better. The next series that I got into, now I didn't read every single book, like not from 1 to whatever, 100 and something. I didn't read every single book. I was very selective, and I think I can explain why. So this series is those Treehouse book series, that funny, quirky little adventure where the kids go in the treehouse and go on different adventures and solve quests and do things like that. I love that series. I don't think I read it religiously 1 to 100 or whatever. There's so many books in that series, but I definitely remember picking up the ones that had to do with like a lot of fantasy, with dragons, creatures, mythology, anything like that. I definitely picked out because as a kid I loved it. Which now, me playing D&D at the age of 26 makes sense because I love fantasy and I love that genre. So any kind of adventure that they went on that involved another world or a new place to explore, I was all up in that. I really enjoyed it. So that was by Andy Griffiths. So the Treehouse series, look it up and see if you can remember those books too, because my goodness, I enjoyed them quite a bit. Oh, the nostalgia definitely washes over you when you hear some of these, so enjoy. Now, the next book here on my list, I don't think people know about it unless you do. If you know this book, let me know. If you know where I can buy it and find it again, let me know, because I'm so sad this book got destroyed between one of my many moves growing up, basically. But this book is called Lightland by H.L. McCutcheon. Lightland. Now I'm going to go into a little bit of a spiel about this book because, again, it has something to do with like creative imagination and kind of the divide between your everyday life and then your imagination coming home. So that has to do a lot like school and home life and that kind of thing. So Lightland is a very beautiful book, and I find it really neat that Charlotte is the main character, but she goes by Lottie. That's her main nickname. And I thought that was such a cute nickname as a younger kid. Like, I actually remember, I think I had like a writing assignment or something like that, and I had to use or create a character, and I used Lottie because of the book, really. And this book is so beautiful because there's tragedy in there, there's a bit of sadness, and then her imagination and the way she interprets her own house and the things that have happened is so unique. And there's a really good message about the darkness that one faces in their life and how they need to help the light again, like find the light again. So there's a whole kind of imaginative world where the darkness has taken over. Then something happens and she gets thrown into this, and she gets to help basically bring the lightness back to the land, this light land. Or, well, it used to be Lightland, but then it becomes Lightland again. And it's a lot of quirky, silly little adventures, of course, because it is a kid's book. But the messages behind that, I still have it stuck with me, where a lot of things can happen, even if you're a young kid, like 10, 12, 13 years old. A lot of things happen, and you can't let that darkness win. You can't let that take over. And I remember that being a prominent theme in that book. And what a beautiful message for like a young kid to read. Someone who may not understand exactly why it is dark or the darkness, you know, but just knows that it's there and trying to find a way to kind of get back to life, basically, and bring back the light. So it's a beautiful book. I haven't read it in a while, so what I'm saying might not be exactly what is in the book, but it's what I remember from the book, and I really do enjoy it. There's a beautiful message about a cherry tree as well, a cherry blossom tree, and like the wood being used to make like a treasure box from her dad, and she keeps all these little keepsakes in it. It's very cute, very beautiful and precious. So if you want a light read, check out Lightland by H.L. McCutcheon. I definitely need to find it again, and I want to reread it, because that's the thing about nostalgia. Once you start feeling it, you want to relive it. So that definitely is how I feel about Lightland now, after, goodness, I think 18 years since I've read it. No, maybe 16 years. Yeah. So, beautiful book. I really loved it. Then, kind of the last one that I remember in this sort of chronological order, kind of, is one that I read in grade 8. This book was really cool, and it really brought me into sort of the, I guess, 80s culture a little bit, 80s, 90s culture, I think, where, again, it's a book where it has to do with kids that don't quite fit in, even within their own, like, stereotype, or even their own side of the tracks, basically. So I'll just say the name of the novel here, The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. I really like that book because unique character names like Ponyboy, you don't hear Ponyboy regularly anywhere anymore unless you talk about The Outsiders. And it's such a unique story, again, about kids that are known as gracers or as the other side. I can't remember the name for those that were more affluent or from like more put together families. But what's really neat about that book is that the racers are always trying to make fun of the other group. The other group's always trying to make fun of the racers. You know, there's that kind of big divide and kind of almost territorial war in the book, you know? But then you learn more about both sides and you realize that, oh crap, like every side struggles. Everyone has their struggles. And then the poem at the end of the book, that's not the only reason. It's one of the main reasons, though, why it's on my list, is because that line, "Nothing gold can stay," has stuck with me to this day. Because it's not a hopeful message per se. It's rather bleak, but the rest of the poem goes on to explain if, like, the good thing goes away, if what's good goes away, there's a way to get through it. And I think that's a beautiful message, especially for times right now. So even if you don't want to go back and read The Outsiders, I recommend reading the poem by Ponyboy at the end of the book, because there's a lot that happens, and I would go into details and explain it at all to you, but I won't. But that poem at the end is so relatable, even to this day. So I recommend it. And I used to have, I think I used to say something along the lines of "nothing gold can stay," or, oh, I said "stay golden" in my older videos. That's used to be my outro, "stay golden," as a way to kind of play on that poem a little bit. So definitely an influence there in my older videos that sadly no longer exists, but maybe I'll bring that back for a couple episodes, who knows. But The Outsiders, a really cool book. Again, not quite fitting in, trying to understand both sides, all sides of the picture. Tragedy happens, and how you move on from it, or how you can move on while holding on to it, you know, that kind of idea of grief and such. Like, it's always going to be there, but how do you move on, or how do you continue moving on? Beautiful book, beautiful message. Okay, now the next here is a little bit all over the place. I have to admit, I realize I separated two fantasy sections here, but you do what you do. So, oh, I spelled his last name wrong here. Whoops. The next series, actually, that I'm going to talk about now is a series that I read in 4 years. I think I read about the 12 or 13 books in this series in 3 or 4 years, because I started it in high school. So yeah, however long high school is, it's how long I read this book for. And this series is The Sword of Truth series by Very Good Kind. Now I'm going to go into this quite a bit, because again, it is 12 to 13 books. And I say 12 to 13 because it's 12 books officially. And there's a book kind of in between a couple books that's kind of a spin-off about one character. And so I always include it as part of the series. But what I like about this series is it's very cleverly done. The world building in this series is very unique and very cool, because it starts out rather typically. You got your main character who lives in a rather smallish town, being mentored by an old man that the whole town thinks is crazy, and his parents and people don't want people to practice magic and that kind of thing, because it can mean that they work for the other side. So there's this big kind of divide there about magic and understanding the magic and being a wizard and all that kind of stuff. So it starts out kind of like that. But what's cool is that each book relates to a wizard's rule that his mentor Zed is trying to teach him. And he doesn't teach the rules in a very scholastic, typical school or tutoring even way. He gives him a sense of adventure, and he has to learn these rules based on the adventures that he goes on. It's very uniquely done that way. And are the lessons learned in the most fun, amazing, woohoo ways? Not always, of course, because a good series has its ups and downs, and Richard in this series goes through a lot of that, and it's so done, and like the world builds over it on and on and on as the character ages, grows up, and experiences life, and finds love, and has his love taken away from him. All that stuff happens in the series, and it's so good. There's even a bit of politics, which I know nowadays talk about politics is not always a fun thing to do, but the way he weaves it into this book is quite neat, and the big final stand at the end of the series has all the politics, the history, the judgments, and all that kind of stuff all really rolls out and plays out in the last book, and it's so well done. I was actually genuinely surprised that a series could be wrapped up quite well in that last book. So I highly recommend it. And I guess for influences, this series, a lot of the characters and moments I still use in a way as like a ode to the series. I still honor it in many ways. There are some passwords of mine, which I really shouldn't say in the podcast, but hello. I'm not gonna tell you what characters or what parts of the book. But there are some passwords that have a little bit of influence from the series that I have. There's an old notebook that I had where to remember certain things, I would like shorthand, use a character and relate that character to the thing I had to remember. Whether it be like the first name, like I have to read this book for school, like I would use Richard, like Richard's name. And then I would remember Richard, oh, read, kind of thing. So it's a little quirky that way, but I found that notebook recently and I was like, oh my god, I am a huge nerd. And I really, really enjoyed that series. And I know he's continued it, or did like a spin-off series with Richard and Kalan, like with one of the two main characters. So I haven't checked that out yet, but I really, really do want to, because he's a phenomenal writer and a phenomenal world builder. And I really wish, I guess a cleric would be like a confessor in this series, but I don't know, I kind of want to create a confessor, and if you read the series you know what I mean, but they're very unique and their power, their magic is very specific, so it's really, really cool. A very awesome series, I love it. Now the next two books I have on my list are more, they're tragic. I'm not going to beat around the bush. They are tragic, they are sad, but almost in a beautiful way because of how it's written. That's the thing about English majors and us heavy readers. You know what I mean when I say a book is beautifully tragic, because of the way it's written, the descriptors, the emotions that come out of the pages, and the characters. It's a full human experience, and that's what these two books are to me. So The 10th Circle and The Lovely Bones. So 10th Circle by Jodi Picoult and The Lovely Bones by Alice Sebold. The 10th Circle is interesting. So if you guys know about the 9 levels of hell and all that kind of stuff, that is definitely played throughout the book. But they add a 10th, and that is like, the 10th is about, the 10th Circle is a little confusing maybe to explain it, but it's from two different perspectives. A parent's anguish over their child growing up and experiencing trauma, and then the child themselves experiencing trauma and what that does to their relationships and that kind of thing. So that's kind of the circle where those two things, those two elements of it, cycle through and through in this book. So a really awful thing happens to the main girl in the book, and then it's her dad that she lives with, who is a comic book artist. So there's that kind of a cool element. There's like 3 stories being told in this book. One is the father himself explaining what's going on, or what he thinks is happening, and what he's feeling, and when he finds out what's going on, all that kind of stuff. Then it's the girl herself explaining what happened to her and the fallout after. And then it's the comic book. So the father, he creates the comic story, or comic graphic novel basically, in the book about the experience. And it has to do with his past a little bit, what's happening currently, and his daughter. So it's a really uniquely written story. It is really difficult to read at times because there are content warning about rape and party culture and such like that. Like, there is that, so Fair warning, if you don't want to read something like that, please don't. But it is a really well written book. And I know people know Jodi Picoult from like a lot of other romance novels, so this is something quite outside of that. So I definitely recommend it if you want to listen or read it. Just in warning, there is rape involved, and it doesn't go away after one scene. It is something constantly kind of brought up, so just fair warning there. I'll give you that warning now before you go and pick it up and then yell at me later. So there's that. And then there's The Lovely Bones. I'm not going to go into it too much because it is a tragic story, and I still get emotional to this day about it. But it's again, even hearing the phrase "the lovely bones," that can bring up so many different connotations for people and images, and I'll leave it at that because if you read the book, you'll understand it. So it is a heavy themed book as well, so content warning there. Definitely check out the synopsis before you pick it up if you want to read it. But those two books go through the human experience and emotions and like the constant cycles of trauma, recovery, relapse, that kind of stuff. It goes through those things beautifully well, tragically well. But yeah, so there's that. There's the heaviness there that I will bring up. There's another book I wanted to add on here, but I couldn't find it again, and it makes me really sad because it was a book that I remember being caught off guard, where it was really, maybe I'll go through the synopsis and one of you people can help me. But it's a book about this girl who lives, I think her uncle or someone is a funeral director, and she has this closet that she lives in. Oh my god, I wish I had found this novel already. It sounds ridiculous already, but basically it's just the story, and it's the ending of the book is so sad because it does have to do with a dog. I don't remember what happens to the dog, but I remember whatever happened to the dog. I bawled at this book. It made me cry so much. And I remember I had a hamster when I read this book, and I remember crying and then just putting my face up against the glass and going, Alice. Yeah, I named my hamster after Alice. Hello. I was like, Alice, why did this have to happen? So there's a very vivid memory there, but if I can find the book, I'll put it in the comment section for you guys, because I realized that was not a lot of detail there, but I couldn't remember all the details from it. I just remember reading it and going, oh my gosh. I didn't expect to cry for reading this book, but here we are. Kind of thing. Goodness. Okay. Now we're moving on to genres here a little bit more. So these ones here are these books are more young adults. So YA books, and oddly enough, I think 3 of these are when I read them later, like in university almost, because of being an education major and all that kind of stuff. You were exposed to a variety of books and novels and things that you had to lesson plan for or unit plan for. So a few of these are from that. But one book I've actually read, I think 3 or 4 times now, and have seen the movie 5 times. It's an influence or something special when it has that much involvement with it. So I'll reveal it. It is Holes by Louisa Carr. So my story with this one is interesting. I remember reading the book in anticipation for the movie coming out on Disney, and I loved it. It was so quirky, weird, unfortunate, again, the main character being the unfortunate person, just unlucky, had a curse on his whole family, a very silly story in that way, but the relationships and the experiences in that book are so interesting, and the connection to history and the past and how it all influences what is currently going on in the book. It's such a cool book to read, and as a kid I was like, I want to see a movie of this. Please tell me that this movie is coming out soon. I need the movie. And then when the movie came out, I was really happy with it. It's one of those, I know it's a Disney Channel movie and has Shia LaBeouf in it, but it is one of those movies that I think was a better adaptation, one of the better adaptations to a book that I've seen. And that's coming from an English teacher, guys. So, what do you know? A young adult novel that has been well adapted into a movie. Heck yes. There's some things that, of course, are a little off with it, but for the most part, I was like, that is exactly how I pictured it. I'm amazed. So that's the childhood version of the book. And the movie for me. Fast forward to last year. No, a year and a bit ago, where I actually had to teach this novel to an English class before my classes got switched. So it would have been maybe 2019, the end of 2019, I taught this novel. And oh my goodness, I remember the kids, when we were reading it out loud and doing the different activities for it, they just really picked up the book and really enjoyed it. And I got to show them only 2 scenes of the movie before my classes got switched at the end of that term, which was so unfortunate, but they loved it. They really, really did. So being able to teach the book and show them all these clever little foreshadowing and hints and things throughout the book that leads to the ending was so fun, because I could tell that the way I was teaching it, or the way that even the movie helped in the book, the kids loved it. And so, again, that passing down a love of a book is really cool that I've had to do that, get to do that twice now in my life. And Holes is definitely going to stay part of my shelf. It's on my bookshelf right now. I don't think I'm ever going to get rid of it. Nope. So there's that. Now the next one here I read in university because we had a project where we had to write a whole unit plan for a novel. And so the novel that my group chose was We Are All Made of Molecules by Susan Nielsen. Fun fact, Susan Nielsen is a writer, or was a writer for Degrassi. So when I found that out, I was like, oh, cool. And her autobiography in the book is really funny because she's like, I figured that since I got to write a few scenes for Degrassi, that maybe I have a knack out for writing, and so wrote this book. And it definitely has a Degrassi vibe in the book for sure, but so what's really neat about this book is that it was my introduction to really having, well, not my introduction, but one of the key books that showed that you can write 2 perspectives. So there's Simon and Ashley, 2 narrators in the book. And the way the story is written, it pieces it together almost completely, and it flows really, really well. And what's cool about this book is that you have Ashley, who's the popular girl, older sister to Simon through marriage. So there's that whole dynamic where the families come together and all the drama and all the different interpretations of what's going on. And then you have Simon. And honestly, I recommend reading the book just for Simon. He is a gifted child, a very unique perspective about the world and his own tragedies and his own uniqueness and that kind of thing. He's a really unique little kid. And if you think about the title, We Are All Made of Molecules, that idea really is a surprisingly constant theme thanks to Simon's perspective. So I really recommend it. It's a refreshing read, something a little different, a little unique, but I really enjoyed it. So I recommend it for you guys. Even as an adult, go back to an easier read every once in a while and just enjoy the fresh kind of perspective from a child's viewpoint, basically. It's really nice to kind of go back and be like, kids are kind of neat. Let's be honest. Kids are cool. So there's that. And then the next one here, a university book as well, is Drama. Now, I remember it standing out to me because I think it was a graphic novel that my professor made us look at, or how would we teach an introduction to the book, I think was the part of the lesson for this one. And so we had our task, of course, was to read the whole book and note and find like the key themes, the key characters, and that kind of stuff, so we could teach an introduction to the book. And I really, really enjoyed this. I think I read it 2 or 3 times because it was so enjoyable to read, and the art style to it is so cool because it would change or reflect the emotions or the drama or the perspective of the characters. It would change a little bit. And so there's the, of course, typical teenage high school drama, but then there's like some real struggles that are presented, and so it would become like a darker tones or really darker imagery, and just dealing with that internal struggle that a teenager faces. And so in that way, that book is done really, really well. Very, very well. Very unique graphic novel, something very different from what I was used to. Because before high school, I read a bit of manga, and manga's not actually on my list. I want to point that out, but only because I didn't read a lot of it. I think I had like a 2 or 3 month period where I read a bunch of manga, and that's about it in my life. So there's that. Take it as you will. But, and for my knowledge, most of the books that I read for manga have never been turned into animes or anything like that. So in much ways, I'm an outsider when it comes to manga. Hello, my life. But that's what I was used to. And then like your typical comic books, or like the comic panels and such. And then to see a story be weaved so well and created so well in a graphic novel and being introduced to that was such a unique experience and way to tell a story. I thought that was really, really cool. So if you're looking for something a little different, I definitely recommend Drama by Raina Telgemeier. Awkward name. It'll take a little bit for you to find it, but it's really, really good. And the last one here for young adult novels is one that I began to teach in the UK, but then classes and my course load got changed, so I ended up actually not teaching it, which is really unfortunate. But I remember reading the book, and being so, it was emotionally driven, very unique, and just trying to figure it out. I remember reading it and going, what the heck is happening? What is this? And so if you guys are wondering what the novel is, it is A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness. Another book here that, it's so sad because it has to do with like an illness in the family, how the kid is coping with it or not coping with it kind of thing. And then there's this monster that comes in the book that also kind of influences the kid, and it's all based on like grief and worry and stress, and so much for a young boy to go through. And so it is really well done, and the book is written in such a way that you're never too sure if what's happening with the dreams and the monster is actually happening in person, like in the actual day-to-day life. And so you're always trying to piece it together and figure it out, and then as the novel goes on, you realize, oh, this monster doesn't just come to him in the dream, it's actually a part of him. It's like that darkness he feels, and that worry and the grief and the concern and all of this like really heavy theme is played throughout. And it's such, again, like another real human experience, another thing that we could probably relate to, where something is going on in our lives and then we do something and then we're like, wait a minute, why did I do that? And you have to like reflect on it, and you're like, oh, that was like a dark thing that I was going through, and that's why I decided to do something. So it does that really, really well. So Patrick Ness, well done. If it's a heavy themed book, again, I realize that most of my books are not very happy-go-lucky books, but I just appreciate like a true, real experience in a book, and A Monster Calls does that for me, for sure. So there's that. Woohoo! So go ahead and enjoy it. Now the next two here I read. I taught one during my practicum, kind of co-taught it with my mentor, and then the other one he introduced it and then I finished teaching it, kind of thing. So this is all in my one practicum and two different classes. So one book is Tuesdays with Morrie, and that's by Mitch Albom. Again, not a happy-go-lucky book. I apologize. It has to do with accepting death, and so Tuesdays with Morrie is basically like that, where Mitch Albom himself goes back to visit his old college professor, Morrie, and as he deals with ALS. So that's, if you guys don't know ALS, it's a pretty nasty disease that basically renders the body useless just throughout. Like, you lose your ability to walk, ability to move your arms, and it goes up to your lungs and heart, and eventually pass on. And so it's a lot about that, and accepting death, and going through life stories with Morrie, and just, it's such a really sad book, because you really do begin to love Morrie as you read it, which sucks, because as you read it, you realize he's gonna die. So there you go, fair warning. It's gonna be one of those books, really heavy, but a lot of the themes in that one is just that we have to embrace that we are going to die someday. And so it goes through that theme quite well. So I recommend that. I'm not going to go into much more of it because I will start crying. But yeah, it's another really human experience in that book, for sure. And the fact that it's based on a real event, a real life, a real experience shows you how much I appreciate that kind of thing. The next one here is actually a good transition, because this book and then two others are my introduction to historic fiction. Or, I'm not going to say the next book here I'm going to talk about is historic fiction. It is historical, but written in like a fiction style novel. So historic fiction loosely, basically. But this book is called Night by Eli Wiesel, and I'm taking a sip of coffee. Here we go. And fair warning, content warning again. Oh goodness, guys, I'm so sorry. I am such, what is it called, Schadenfreude kind of reader, where I like to read about tragedies and let that wash over me, and here we are again. But this book is based off World War II and the Holocaust. And Eli Wiesel, I'm probably saying his name very wrong, but he writes about his experience, or his a real experience that happened during the Holocaust. And it's like The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, which is actually kind of on my list too, where it's one of those books where you're almost not surprised, yet surprised about what happens, if that makes sense, because we've been taught the Holocaust and World War II history quite a bit, so you can just imagine what is in this book. But it really goes into a lot of details about how Auschwitz wasn't the sole main concentration camp. There were others, and a lot of these people didn't just stay in one. They were forced to be transported to others and face different kinds of treatments depending on where they went and how they handled themselves. So it's a book like that. So it's heavy, it's difficult, but it's really, really well written. And if you appreciate literature like I do, you'd appreciate that quite a bit. So there's Nights. And of course, now I mentioned The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, a really sad book and movie. And it's what makes it even difficult for that book in particular is that it's seen through a child's perspective. So you know the innocence, the naivety, all that kind of stuff is in there. So it's almost more heartbreaking in that way. So of course, The Boy in the Striped Pajamas is on that list too, and it follows Nights well, because if you want like a reflective experience of that time period, Eli Wiesel, like Nights is for you. Want to read a perspective of a little boy during that time period, The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. So yeah, moving on to not so tragic book here, or two books really. I love Kate Moss as an author. Now I'll admit I've only read these two books from her. I know she has many others that I do want to check out, but these two books stand out for me because they are historical fiction, and it's uniquely done. Because, again, I like books with two perspectives, but what's cool about these two books is that there's someone in current times, so like 2000s kind of thing, and they're traveling and going to go experience something, like in Europe or wherever, really. And then the second perspective, the second story being told, is of a character in the past. And she weaves these stories quite well because you can't quite see how they're connected. You see, oh, there's some kind of consequential things happening, like, oh, really? That's creepy. She's actually in the same cottage that this person built. There's that kind of weird, like, eerie almost consequences between the two sides of the book, or two sides of the story, but then it clashes and it begins to weave together in such a unique way, and you're like, oh, I didn't know how these two people or two characters were going to come together, and then when it happens you're like, mind blown. So it is really well done. Now I will give you a fair warning, these two books are very thick. And I'm not saying that in the meme sense. I'm saying that they are huge novels, so they will take you time to read them. But if you are interested in that kind of a weird, starting off with two very separate stories and how they weave together with a historical influence, check them out. It's worth the read. Absolutely is. I loved it. Fun thing is Labyrinth is the first book I read, Labyrinth, and then there's Sepulchre. Labyrinth was a book club book we started in high school, and everyone in the group decided to stop reading it because of its length. Yet I continued because I was so old, and the librarian at the time, she was impressed because I actually finished reading it within a few months, basically, while reading another book. But mind you, the book that we switched to I did not like, and that was The Catcher in the Rye. Sorry, Catcher in the Rye fans. Did not like it. Don't like them. But anyway. So yeah, Labyrinth is a very, very thick book. Not good for book clubs, as you can tell, but if you are looking for a longer read, I definitely recommend Labyrinth and Sepulchre by Kate Moss. So it's a very cool book. Very, very well written. Now the next year is kind of like the last book that's kind of current, and an author who's very current. Then it moves to a lot of my classical literature, and I have quite a bit of classical literature on my list because as an English teacher and English major, you go through a lot of classical literature because in most cases you do have to teach some of these books as a teacher. So I end up reading them and I love them. But before we get to that point, this author is beautiful soul. I follow her on Instagram. I'm subbed to her monthly or weekly newsletter, and I just love her poetry so much. So this book is actually poetry, and you guys might guess who it is, but it is Ruby Kaur. So the three books that I know are Milk and Honey, The Sun and Her Flowers, and Homebody. Now, I've read the first two, and I own the second, which is such a chaotic spread. I need to get Milk and Honey and Homebody. I haven't got those two yet, but I did read Milk and Honey during my first practicum, actually, in university, and I love the poetry and just how real a lot of her themes are. And then the same thing with The Sun and Her Flowers. It's a beautifully constructed book if you think about the growth of a flower. So it's just it's so beautiful, and her poetry's so good. And I haven't read Homebody yet, but I've seen a lot of like fan-made things, and she likes to post some quotes from the pages and the books herself on Instagram, and I can't wait to actually read it. But it's so beautiful, and it's uniquely her life and uniquely her perspectives on like love and healing and hurt and pain and trauma and culture and racism and there's a lot in her poetry, and it's just so beautifully written. Some of her poems are very, very short. Some of her poems are longer, and both give you such a thrill while reading it. And I love it. I think I did a Dragons read on The Sun and Her Flowers, so if you want to check out some of that poetry, go check out The Sun and Her Flowers reading video I did, because it's beautiful. It really is. I don't know what else to say. I really enjoy it, and the experience of the book from start to finish is really good. So we are blessed to have Ruby Kaur as a prolific poet. So there's that. Goodness, now we move into the potentially boring stuff for you guys. Sorry, not sorry. We were dealing with an English major and a podcast. You're gonna get the classics, and don't worry, I've kept Shakespeare till the very end, so these books are uniquely not Shakespeare. You're welcome. But Shakespeare will play a part at the end. So, the first one I'm actually going to talk about is a well-known story that I've actually read. I found the book at my grand's once when I was staying over at her place, and I read it at her place. And I thought, whoa, this story is way different than the movies or like the childhood experiences that I had, and that is Alice in Wonderland. My God, that story is written very cool, and it's unique. And I know he has other books like that follow the Alice in Wonderland series, so I haven't read those yet, but I've read the first book, and I was like, damn, this is way better than the movie. It's way more real, or set up in a much more it's just like a much better way. Like, you know more about her life and her story and her experiences before she goes down the rabbit hole and all that stuff. And like, I actually recommend, if you guys can find a book, find the Alice in Wonderland stories, read them, and then go watch the movies, because you'll be like, whoa, dang, there's much more that happens in here than what we see in the movies. So very, very interesting. Again, it's one of those things where, like, book adaptations, right? So if I had read the book before the movie growing up, I would have been like, what? And now I'm like that too, because I've realized how much has happened or changed, basically. So I recommend reading it. Go read the actual Alice in Wonderland story. You'll be surprised at what's in the movie and what's not in the movie. You really will be. It's a very crazy thing. Don't worry, the Cheshire Cat is in the book, and I like him in the book. That's what I'll say. And okay, another classic here. Now this one is with my sci-fi phase. In university, I took a comparative literature course in science fiction. So we basically looked at the novels, like the sci-fi novels that have been interpreted into TV shows, or scenes from the book have been put into TV shows or movies, that kind of thing. So we did look at Firefly. Fun fact, we did get to watch Firefly quite a bit in that class. And then, yeah, the Blade Runner series. So if you guys know those films, I found out that it's actually based on this book, and it's Do Androids Dream of Electronic Sheep by Philip K. Dick. What a unique book. Think about the title itself. Do Androids Dream of Electronic Sheep? So obviously there's that tale where if you can't sleep at night, try to count sheep. Like close your eyes, picture sheep, and count them until you fall asleep. Well, this interpretation is a little different in his book. And it's just a whole story of, okay, it's based away in the future. We have more robots, androids, basically robots that look very humanistic and human-like. And it's like a dystopian novel too, where the earth has been practically destroyed and ruined, resources depleted, all that stuff. People are moving to different planets and such, and then you've got your bounty hunters and all that kind of stuff. It's a very cool book, and I really actually enjoyed reading it. I didn't think I would, because I don't really like the robot theme, pretty much. I don't like the android or robot theme, but reading that book changed my mind, and so that's why I loved watching people play, Detroit Beyond Human Detroit, that game. I really enjoy people watching it, because I'm like, oh god, I'm getting such like electronic sheep vibes from this. So yeah, if you are into sci-fi and you need a good sci-fi book, check that out. I also recommend H.G. Wells and Ursula Le Guin. Oh god, I hope I said that. Check those guys out if you want like a really typical classic sci-fi novel or books. Check them out. It's so good. H.G. Wells' Time Machine, absolutely one of my favorites too, so I had to throw that in here. But yeah, Philip K. Dick, Do Androids Dream of Electronic Sheep. If you like the Blade Runner movies, you will like that book. I promise you. It's very good. Now we have To Kill a Mockingbird. Now, that is one of my favorites. I know some people don't like it. Some people absolutely hate it. And that's fine. You do you. And I know with like a lot of, again, we're experiencing themes of racism quite a bit. And so this book goes into that quite well. But I really love the book. I do. Just again, a child perspective of things going on. Realizing that, you know, people aren't always the hero she thought they were. Trying to handle and deal with a world that's treating people differently based on the way they look. Like, it's not necessarily a positive book to read, but it is a really good story, and I do actually really enjoy it. And I have not read the follow-up to this, because Harper Lee actually wrote a second book after To Kill a Mockingbird. I have not checked that out yet, and I really want to. If you guys have, let me know. I want to see if it's worth picking up, because I really liked Scout and Atticus and these characters in the book. I just, maybe not like some of these characters, but the way they're written and portrayed and the story, I really do enjoy it to this day. So there's that, To Kill a Mockingbird. Now, these ones here are for sure classics. I'm just going to list them really quickly before the Shakespeare stuff, and then I'll go into why I like them. So we have Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, Dracula by Bram Stoker, The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes and by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and then The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So there you go. Frankenstein, Dracula, Sherlock Holmes, Jekyll and Hyde. We have so many interpretations of these original novels that it can be hard to think about, oh, what was the actual original? Who is it actually by? So yeah, there you go. Those are the author names: Mary Shelley, Bram Stoker, Arthur Conan Doyle, and Robert Louis Stevenson. They wrote those novels, and I recommend going back and reading these originals, because we know the stories, we know the tales, we know roughly kind of what these characters and stories are about, but if you go back and really read it, you might actually like classic literature. because especially Dracula, oh my god, I recommend Dracula so much. It's such a creepy tale. It really, really is. And you don't realize how creepy it is until you actually get fully immersed reading it. And oh my god, I even still get chills to this day reading the introduction or the first part of the book where Jonathan arrives to the castle. That whole sequence of events that he writes about is actually terrifying. And you guys might have heard that computer desktop notification. That made me jump just thinking about those first few scenes in the book. So it is actually a terrifying read, but it's so well done. It really, really is. So I definitely recommend going back and reading Bram Stoker's version of Dracula. Frankenstein too, there's the very subtle elements of horror and madness and that kind of theme that we see in adaptations of it. And realizing Frankenstein is not the monster. Frankenstein is the scientist that created the monster. So there's that kind of revelation and realization as you're reading it. It's so cool. Again, we appreciate the classics through many different forms of media, like television shows, characters, movies, adaptations, but nothing is more truer than the actual classic book. Go pick it up. You'll be surprised. I promise. It's really, really good. And Sherlock Holmes, so the thing about Sherlock Holmes is that it's a series of books that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle has written. So that might take a little longer to get through. But if you want help on where to start, the Sherlock series, each episode is basically loosely based off a book or two. So if you look at the episode titles and just search the episode title, you'll probably be able to find the book by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. That might be a good place to start. Yeah, it's really good. And I love Winston more so in the books than I do, I think, in any adaptation I've seen. So, I recommend it. Now we're into Shakespeare. Oh, guys. What can I say about Shakespeare? I know there's tons and tons of controversies and stories and theories about Shakespeare out there. I know people think that he wasn't just one writer who wrote all these things, it was multiple writers, all that jazz. Put all that aside. I love some plays of his. I do like some sonnets, but that was harder for me to find. Because again, the sonnets are all numbered, so I can't quite remember the numbers off the top of my head. But so I do like the sonnets. They're a little harder to interpret and understand, of course, than the plays, but still very cool. Check them out. I recommend reading them. But my favorite plays. Now, I've actually put these in order. So my top 4 Shakespearean plays are as follows: Hamlet, Othello, Macbeth, and A Midsummer's Night's Dream. Those are my top 4. I like that the tragedies are my top 3. Good job, me. But what I like about Hamlet is that you can really start seeing Hamlet's descent into madness very, very well in that play. And I think I really like that quite a bit. But then Ophelia is such a heartbreaking character. You really feel for her because you can see how Hamlet's like hyper-focus and hyper-fixation on figuring out what happened to his father ends up really, really ruining other characters and other people. And so I really like that part about the play. And I love the circus, like he puts on a play within a play, like that clever trope. But I'm a sucker for that, by the way. A game within a video game, a movie within a movie, a show within a show, a play within a play. I am a sucker for those kinds of things. I really, really am. So yeah, we do that. Hamlet does that quite well because he puts on that play to see if his uncle will react to it, because he finds out that his uncle killed his dad. He needs to figure out, like, how did he do it? And he puts out a play that is, oddly enough, very close to what actually happened to Hamlet's dad. And he waits and wants to see Claudius's reaction. So it's a very clever thing that goes on in Hamlet, and I deeply appreciate that play so much. And then all the modern adaptations of it. I have one that's Letters to Juliet? No. There's another book I had it's Hamlet. It's the story of Hamlet in a modern version, but Ophelia tells the story. So that's a unique perspective where Ophelia, it's from her perspective, and she sees what is happening to Hamlet and all that kind of stuff. So it's a very unique book, very unique perspective to it. So you could tell I appreciate Hamlet on that deep of a level when I'm reading other adaptations and perspectives of what happens. So yeah, Hamlet is really good. Now, Othello. The reason why I like Othello might surprise many of you. I like a good villain, and Othello has that in the character of Iago. What a massive manipulator. Now, if you guys haven't read Othello in a while, Iago is the one behind the scenes with, like, puppet strings. He's kind of trying to control and manipulate situations and things to basically get Othello out. He does not want Othello to have a higher rank than he does. So he is trying to pull all these characters and manipulate them and move them in certain ways and directions in order to prove Othello wrong. And to destroy his life, basically. He's such a crazy criminal. And of course, a good Shakespearean play involves a lot of death and tragedy, and Iago's definitely part of that. And my favorite female character, I do not like Desdemona very well. I think that's Desdemona in this play. I feel like she is very much like a damsel in distress kind of a character for me, unless that's another play I'm remembering. Anyway, I didn't like her. The only female character I like in that play is Emilia, and that's Iago's wife. Because it's just, her story is more tragic than the others, because she gets accidentally killed throughout the whole craziness that Iago has done in the play. So what's with me with tragic, sad deaths of women in Shakespeare? But that's Shakespeare for you, really. So Othello, if you want a good villain, study the character of Iago. He is so crazy manipulative, and it just ends with such crazy chaotic tragedy. So Othello, man, check it out. And then Macbeth. We all know Macbeth, right? We know that story. Do I really need to go into details about it? We got superstition, we've got greed, we want power, then what happens when you have the power, the fallout of all that, the premonitions. There's just so much craziness in Macbeth that it is almost chaotic to read, but it's such a fun read. So I tip my hat down to Macbeth, of course. I love Macbeth. And then my comedy, out of the tragedies here, bringing a little more lightness to this, is A Midsummer's Night's Dream. You can tell that I like plays with chaos, and A Midsummer's Night's Dream is that. It's a whole chaotic love mix-up, triangles, craziness that goes on here, and it's just you can't help but laugh, because one of the characters gets turned into a donkey, and there's the whole thing about, like, trying to get these couples together despite the pressures going on in Rome, and then having them drink the wrong potion or fall in love with the wrong person or the flower and all that. It's just so chaotic, and it's so much fun to see chaos and having fairies in a story, and I can't help but smile. I had to read all of A Midsummer's Night's Dream in a summer once, because I was told that I might have to teach it. And so I had so much fun reading that in the summer. I think I read that while I was down in Virginia Beach, actually, with my friends. So it's so funny. I really love that book and that story. I mean, if you guys have no idea what I'm talking about with fairies and mixing up the couples and love and the chaos and trying to fix it and not fixing it well enough, and then having the queen fall in love, the queen fairy falling in love with Puck, the donkey boy. It's just, there's so much chaos through the attempts of trying to fix what happened. It's really funny, and I've got to see A Midsummer's Night's Dream performed on stage, so there's a whole deeper appreciation for that when you actually get to see something act out on stage. So I really, really appreciate that. Same with Phantom of the Opera. It's kind of cool. I've seen that now on stage, and I've now read it as a book, and oh god, it's still the same immense joy of like the experience of seeing it performed and now reading it. I think that proves that I'm an English major. Yeah, quite well. Man, those 4 Shakespearean plays plus the sonnets are so good. And now I have a special message, a special honorable mention, and that's Charles Dickens. I love Christmas Carol. I love reading it, and a few others of his novels and stories. They are so good, and again, very creative. I really do like A Christmas Carol a lot. Just the idea of this, of Scrooge, Ebenezer Scrooge, and how cold he is on Christmas, and then having all these spirits come to him and teach him the lessons that he needed to become more human and less greedy. It's such a cool story, and I really, really enjoy it. All the adaptations of it have been so much fun throughout the years, and I shout out Charles Dickens because I've actually been to his museum. There's a museum in London, the Charles Dickens Museum, and it was the house that he lived in while living in London, and going through all the tales, the stories, his life, I have a deeper appreciation for Charles Dickens. And same as Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, I got to go to the Sherlock Holmes Museum. Now that one's more touristy trappy than like a deeply respected, honorable thing, more so to like the author. But it's still like a really cool thing to go through and have those experiences, and again, continuous influence on me, my life, my interest, that kind of thing. And I think that's a great way to wrap this up. Now, these are not all the books I've read. Obviously, if these were all the books I've read, we'd be here for like another 4 hours. But these are the ones that stood out to me, that I remember the most, and that I would actually go reread if I could, and I want to. So maybe some of these books are your favorites too. If you like classics, maybe some of these will be good for you. And others you might not have known of or heard about and you want to check out. The world is your oyster, and reading is such an important part of life, so I highly recommend picking up maybe one of these books, or find a series or genre you like and read a book now and then. Take some time away from technology, from life, and enjoy reading again. And that message goes to me as much as it goes to you, because I have not finished a novel since I was teaching last year, so I need to do better at reading. And so, yeah, that message of pick up a book every now and then goes to me as much as it goes to you. I hope you enjoyed all this chat and talk about favorite books and series. If you want any of the authors' names typed out for you, let me know. I can send you it. And yeah, thank you guys so much for listening. And that is another nostalgic episode. I hope you enjoyed your drinks and the tales and stories of books and influences. I will see you guys in the next episode of Stardew on Monday. Take care and bye-bye.